Good morning and welcome once again to Fired Up. I'm your host Bob Irwin for this show. We're going to be talking about guns, politics, and self-defense on this half hour, particularly a case recently from New Jersey, which is kind of the most extreme example I've ever seen about getting yourself in trouble with another state's laws when you are not familiar with those laws. We had a young man here, this case goes back to about 2002, who was moving from Maine to Texas. He packed up his car and unfortunately drove through New Jersey and decided to stop there for the night to get back on the highway and actually sleep in his car to get some rest, and then continue on in his travel to get to Texas. He had a little run-in with the police department there, and I'm going to start off by asking retired Chief Mike Mayberry from Henderson Police Department to give a couple of comments on what happened to this young man.
Well, he laid down in his front seat. He did have some firearms in the car with him that did not comport with New Jersey's laws. They were perfectly fine in Maine, perfectly fine in Texas, but not fine in New Jersey. So he parked in a place that would cause a reasonable person to stop him. It wasn't anything unreasonable about this stop. This might have been a situation, and everything went downhill from there. This might have been a situation where a supervisor comes in the end, young guy's trying to do the right thing. He's trying to apply the law as he's been trained in it. And it might have been the time for the supervisor to say, hey, sometimes discretion is the better part of valor here. This guy's wrong. Don't come back to New Jersey, and send the guy on his way, rather than arrest him and put him in prison for 5 years.
Yeah. That's the other retired officer on the panel with me this morning is Tony D., who's a firearms instructor here at the gun store. Pick it up, Tony.
From what we read on this thing, there has to be more to this than what we're hearing, because I could not imagine in any conceivable way that this would go that bad that fast.
Yeah.
I mean, there had to been some other extenuating circumstances that we're not aware of. But in my 20 years, I could never even think of something like this going that way. I mean, it's amazing.
Yeah, where we're going here, not to confuse the audience, is the gentleman who's an ex-cop managed to get himself arrested and actually ended up doing time in prison over this event. Got two attorneys with us this morning, Michael Giles and Clark Patrick. Drop in a little bit from legally what was happening at this point.
Well, the police officers saw a vehicle parked at 3:30 in the morning behind a bank, drew their attention, saw him asleep, and they looked inside the vehicle and saw what appeared to be a gun case. He asked the driver, do you have any guns in the car? And he said, no, I don't. It's all good.
He was asleep when they came up.
He was asleep when they knocked on the window and woke him up. The officer felt that the gun cases indicated there were guns in the car, which could be a violation of New Jersey law. They have very strict gun control laws there. He called for backup. They asked some more questions, and ultimately they checked the two gun cases that were in plain view and found firearms that would theoretically be illegal under New Jersey law, what they call an assault rifle. It was an AR-15. At that point, they put him in handcuffs. They arrested him for obstructing. They hauled the truck off and got a search warrant, and they found 21 firearms, including hollow point ammunition. One of the firearms was locked. It was a Glock within immediate reach of the driver. These are all violations of New Jersey law.
Right?
And that one was loaded.
All right. So there's a violation there.
So,
Clark, do we have a lawful search here, or
I think it very well could be, because plain view and plain view is two different things, and I don't think a gun case would lead to plain view if you have the person out of the car and safely to where he can't reach any of the firearms in the car. Then, because there's a gun case, may be probable cause for a search, but I don't think it raises to the exigent circumstances of plain view doctrine to where you can just search it without a warrant.
That, as it turns out later on in this, that was one of the issues, whether it was in plain view and it was a lawful search. I understand.
Correct, because the gun itself wasn't in plain view gun case, but that doesn't mean there's a firearm in the gun case. And I think Tony's absolutely right. And because if the guy tells him no, there's no guns in the car, and then they find out differently, they're going to handle the situation a lot different than if he'd come clean and said, yeah, I got tired, I didn't want to hurt anybody on the road, so I pulled over and stopped. I'm sorry, I was unaware of the New Jersey laws. I have my guns, I'm just moving. Escort me the last 20 miles to Pennsylvania and we'll be done. But I think there's right. There has to be more to this because he had to start either mouthing off to the cop.
One would think. I mean, Mike, if you're in that position, you're the officers on the scene.
Typically, there's a couple of things that will get you in trouble with young police officers. It's hard to tell when a bad guy is the bad guy or when a guy's just a good guy who's in a bad situation. And obstructing, the fact that they arrested him from obstructing tells me that somehow he was sideways with the officers at the scene.
Yeah,
And it went downhill from there. The unfortunate thing is I don't think anybody foresaw that this guy would actually go to prison for 5 years. I don't think even the officers on the scene would have thought
That's
that.
the amazing part of this case. This thing just gets worse and worse and worse as
It's
time goes on. There would be a point there where even if he was belligerent, where I would think the officers would go, okay, we understand you didn't know the law, you're not trying to hurt anybody, have a nice life, drive slowly, we're going to take your guns apart and throw them back in the car and send you on your merry way. But is it possible there's some pressure on the officers? I mean, do they have I don't know if you know anybody from New Jersey. Tony, you were a cop nearby there.
Right.
Is this
you get
no quarter given kind of situation?
You get a young, aggressive officer who was following the exact letter of the law. Yes, I could see something like this de-escalating to this point. But in any the supervisor coming down should have been able to resolve it in a lot less manner, a lot brutal. I mean,
I would not want to be the chief of a police department that sent somebody to prison for 5 years for this.
Right.
I mean, there are people who kill people who don't go to prison for 5 years, whether it's in vehicles or in other ways. I mean, the discretion would have been a much better way to handle this. And I would want my officers, I would want this to be a learning experience for that young officer. And I would want the supervisor to come in and say, hey, we got this guy, but in this situation, rather than send him to prison, let's send him on his way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A teachable moment.
We always call it a teachable moment. It only gets worse. We follow along to, now he's arrested, he's bailed out, goes to Texas.
Right.
And
without his firearms.
He actually returned for arraignment. They took this to the grand jury. And he returned for arraignment, and the judge told him, look, you have to come back for trial. If you don't come back for trial, we're going to have your trial without you. And he didn't return for the trial. Now,
he's indicted he goes back for the arraignment. He's indicted by the grand jury in New Jersey.
Correct.
He's got to know that this is like getting very serious.
He knew that. He had an attorney. He had an appointed attorney.
So he has an attorney and decides not to attend his own trial.
That's the best way to describe it. He stayed in Texas. His attorney had a very difficult time explaining why his client wasn't sitting next to him at the actual trial.
Have either of you ever had that? I mean, other than your client's a fugitive, have you had your client just decide not to show up in court?
You can.
Other than the fact he's running to Brazil or something, but
You can do a trial without a client. In death penalty cases, the penalty phase where the jury decides whether or not they're going to give your client the death penalty, it's in the statute that they do not have to be there if they choose not to be. But for, in a case like this where he had an arguable case that a decent attorney could have explained to the jury, look, this isn't, we're way beyond where we should be. It's going to look much better with him sitting there than for his attorney to have to come up and say, well, my guy's in Texas, he didn't think this was important enough to come to. So
I can see a great opportunity here for jury nullification. That the
Right,
jury just looks at it and
absolutely,
says
sure.
it's ridiculous, but he wasn't there.
But he wasn't there.
So-
And I think that tells a lot to the jury. If you don't care enough to come back for your trial, then why should they show you any
You know,
Mercy.
given all the things that happened early on and how easily things could have gone another way, the fact that he didn't show up for his trial is
That's just
it's
that
inexcusable.
reaches stupid.
Yeah.
It's telling. I think it goes back to what we were talking about before. I think he got sideways with the cops to start with, and his attitude probably escalated this farther than it needed to be, and that was just the final straw, if you would, that he's showing disdain for the whole system by not coming back for his trial.
He probably didn't believe he'd actually go to prison.
Well,
He was wrong, incorrect.
he believes it now, but we're going to break for a couple of commercials here and give our listeners and watchers time to go grab a cup of coffee. We'll be back in just a few. We are back, going over possibly the stupidest case I have ever seen in my life, other than the fact that this gentleman ended up in prison over falling over New Jersey law and so far not showing up at trial. A few more details, Mr. Giles, on the legal end.
This entire incident was filmed. This department in New Jersey has the little cameras in the dash. As the officer rolled up, he turned it on. The trial court watched the video. The appellate court watched the video. I really wish this was one of those situations where it just spun out of control, but by all accounts it didn't. He appeared a little nervous. The officer noted he appeared a little nervous. He clearly lied to the officers up front. The license plates on the truck weren't quite the right ones, but that's because he couldn't get them off. He had the real ones in the car. He couldn't produce insurance. These are all little things that should not have led to his arrest. Unfortunately, my reading of this, and I think he was stymied because he was in a small town. This is a huge thing for a little cop town. He just ran afoul of New Jersey's vehemently anti-gun laws. And these officers found the firearms. They had a huge bust. And then, of course, he exacerbated it by not coming to his trial because they dismissed a couple of the counts. The jury, even without him there, his attorney did a great job of getting some of the counts dismissed. Maybe sitting there if they could have put a face to the individual, but there's no way these people sitting on the jury didn't think he was a fugitive from justice.
And if he's showing disregard like that to the jury, I mean to the entire court, by not showing up too.
And it's not just a face. If he took the stand and said, "Look, this was not my intent. I was tired. I thought it was safer for me to get off the highway instead of run the risk of getting into an accident, and I was 20 miles from the border. When I woke up, I was going to drive," and let the jury see that. And if he was truly remorseful and show the jury that, "Hey, I'm not a bad guy. I was just going through your state," they could have easily let him off.
All of that notwithstanding, if I'm driving across New Jersey, and I've been a policeman for, I was a policeman for 29 years, but say when I was 37, I'd been a policeman for about 14 years or something. And I have a firearm in the car, and I just happen to cut across a corner of New Jersey, and I've got my wife and kids with me because I'm traveling across the country and I want to keep them safe. Now I'm going to go to prison for 5 years? Those laws are off the hook.
Right.
Yeah.
This gets to a ridiculous point here. So you mentioned he also lost it at the appeals court.
At the first level appeal.
He's convicted in absentia without himself being
In
in
absentia.
court. They put out then a warrant.
They put a warrant out. They arrested him. He was arrested in Texas, extradited back to New Jersey. And unfortunately, in New Jersey, these particular offenses for which he was convicted have mandatory time requirements. And so, the 5 years, and the judge actually did him a favor. He ran all of the sentences concurrent.
So he's got 21 firearms he shouldn't have had.
He was only convicted of 4 things. And they ran the 2 big sentences, which were 5 years with 3-year minimums on them, to the other 2 minor sentences, which were 18 months. He ran them concurrent. So the guy's really only doing the 5 years. His first appeal came up after he's done 3.5 years in custody. He's technically eligible for parole right now. And the appeals court shot down every argument they made.
And so the appeals court could have then looked at it, realized he'd done 5 years already, So this is a multi-level thing in New Jersey.
Absolutely. No, this is a
He
situation,
was
in fact,
there for the appeal,
he was there
right?
for the appeal. He was there for the appeal.
in change,
And
right?
actually,
Much
here's the most important thing in the entire appeal. They strike because the core of his argument was the Second Amendment.
Let's hit that right after the break. We're going to break for a few more messages from our sponsors, and we'll be right back. Good morning again. This is your host, Bob Irwin. We are back with my attorney battery, Clark Patrick, Michael Giles, instructor in police battery, Tony D., and Michael Mayberry, and a guy who I wish was here so we could ask him why this went on the way it did. But anyway, there was a little more now because he's convicted. Now he has a chance to go to the appellate court.
Right. His attorney filed a good appeal on several issues, that the prosecutors messed up the grand jury, that he was protected under federal law, that he didn't actually violate the New Jersey laws the way it's written. There's some loopholes in it. And ultimately, that the law itself violated his Second Amendment rights. Now, we all know that there are courts who put their own personal spin on decisions the way they feel the law should be. Sometimes they get it right, sometimes they get it wrong, but ultimately they make that decision. He happens to be in an anti-gun state with anti-gun judges, and his final argument, which was that the Second Amendment protects him from this. The recent Heller case and McDonald case should have prevented them from doing this to him because he has a right to have these firearms and transport
He's
them.
keeping and bearing arms. He's not attacking
Absolutely.
anybody, just quietly driving through a state.
And
So-
here's what the court said. His final argument, defendant claims his conviction should be reversed because New Jersey's gun control scheme violates his rights under the Second Amendment to keep and bear arms. We disagree. Okay, the Second Amendment does not create, quote unquote, a right to keep and carry any weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever and for whatever purposes. That's from the Heller decision. They went and pulled one sentence from a 35-page opinion that the rest of the opinion pretty much says guns are protected, the right to have them is protected. They found the one sentence where one of the justices said, now we're not saying this means you can carry everything, and I've actually heard that justice talk on the issue, and he said, we were talking about rocket launchers and things with that opinion. So New Jersey, the appeal court in New Jersey went out of their way to find the state right and this kid wrong on every issue he raised.
Because if I'm not, I've been doing this a year or two myself, and if I'm not, I don't understand the Second Amendment being applied that way. Here we have a citizen just sitting there. He is not attacking anybody, didn't threaten the officers, didn't do anything.
Certainly not the way the Supreme Court applied it in Heller.
He's bearing his arms going from down the highway, basically, and he stops behind a bank, which was probably not the smartest thing, but we've already pretty much established this is not the smartest defendant we've ever seen. But
here's the thing we need to understand about New Jersey. Even under the federal law that allows you to transport firearms, they've arrested people who were absolutely within the law. Recently, a plane was diverted. The guy was traveling with firearms legally declared on the airline. They put him up at a hotel. The next day, instead of taking a bus out of town, he went back to the airport, said, I need to redeclare my guns. They arrested him. Yeah. It took an attorney and court hearings to get those charges dismissed. So it's not like
he
didn't want to go to New Jersey. And
he was kidnapped by the airline.
Literally, what the Firearms Owners Protection Act was designed to prevent was I never meant to go to New Jersey or Massachusetts or New York. A quirk of fate put the plane on the ground there. I'm not
exactly
breaking
right.
your law, and they went ahead and arrested him anyway.
I read that case, and it's those kinds of things, along with this case. I saw it in 30 years, 35 years of police work. Bad laws with strict enforcement make cases like Miranda and Escobedo and on and on and on and on. These are the kind of thing that if it gets up to the Supreme Court, it could actually define the Second Amendment better.
it apparently may be going there.
It's where it's
if
headed.
this guy has
We'll
the
see
money
if
to
they
do
hear
it.
it.
Now his next appeal is to the New Jersey
New
Supreme
Jersey
Court.
Supreme Court. Yeah.
Where we expect probably the same answer.
Absolutely the same answer.
Well, you get the same answer in the Ninth Circuit, probably.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there for the moment. We'll be back right after these messages with our closing segment. Stay put. And we are back. If there's a show ever that you were going to record to remind yourself about something when you're driving out of state with your gun, watch this show before you drive anywhere. Couple last thoughts, Patrick.
You know, it's sad, especially this guy is a veteran and an ex-police officer, that he had to go through this. It's just a comedy of errors, and hopefully that somebody will get this to the United States Supreme Court and they'll get it straightened out.
Mr. Giles?
I have clients all the time who tell me, yeah, I don't worry about that when I go to California or New York or wherever, because they're not going to arrest me. This case proves that, you know what, if you violate what they consider to be a sacred cow, you will go to prison, you will pay the penalty, and they don't care. This kid wasn't a bad kid.
I had a guy in class last week, a CCW class, and he was saying about all these outrageous things that he was doing. He never had problem. I told him, you didn't run into the right cop yet. It's, you know, you're putting yourself, he was talking about doing stupid things, and I'm saying, you know, you just haven't run into the right police officer yet. You're asking for it, and you know, eventually it's going to happen to him too. You know?
This guy is going to get added to our CCW class. It's
Yeah,
last shot,
I would
Mike.
say if you're going to travel across this country, you literally need to map out your route and check the laws if you're going to be carrying firearms with you. And I would be if I was traveling across the country, because I'll tell you, I have talked to some of my younger officers when I was still on the force and said, why in the world would you arrest this person? Weren't you ever at a park when you were a kid with a beer? And they, no, sir, never. And I hired you? What was I thinking? I don't know. So, you know, if you catch the wrong guy on the wrong day, you got a big problem.
That's right.
Well, thank you for listening. We've run out of time. We're going to be back next week at the same time. You can catch the radio show. We do equivalent of this on KXNT at 5 p.m. on Sunday nights. Tune in for that one. Thanks for listening.